Woman vanished after leaving a party in 1998. 15 years later, a hiker found this in the woods. The autumn leaves crunched beneath expensive heels as guests mingled on the stone terrace of the Blackwood estate. Crystal glasses clinked in celebration, and laughter echoed through the crisp October evening. It was supposed to be a perfect night, the kind that would be remembered for years to come. Instead, it became the night that haunted Sycamore Ridge forever. Danielle Harrow adjusted the strap of her emerald dress as she moved through the crowd, her warm smile lighting up conversations wherever she stopped. At 28, she had that rare combination of beauty and intelligence that made people gravitate toward her. As a beloved third-grade teacher at Pine Valley Elementary, she knew how to make anyone feel special with just a few words. "Danielle! There you are!" called Margaret Blackwood, the radiant bride-to-be, as she swept across the terrace in her champagne-colored gown. "I was just telling everyone about the surprise you organized for the children's reading program. You're absolutely wonderful." Danielle's cheeks flushed pink. "It was nothing, really. The kids deserve every chance they can get." She had spent her own money buying books for students whose families couldn't afford them, but she never liked making a big deal about it. The engagement party was the social event of the season. Gerald Latham, a prominent businessman and longtime family friend of the Blackwoods, had opened his sprawling estate for the celebration. The property sat on 200 acres of pristine woodland, complete with manicured gardens, a private lake, and hiking trails that disappeared into the dense forest beyond. As the evening progressed, Danielle found herself checking her watch more frequently. She had been expecting an important phone call all day, something about a legal matter she had been quietly pursuing. Few people knew about the complicated inheritance dispute that had torn her family apart 3 years earlier. The wounds were still fresh, and the memory of her last conversation with her mother, Eloise, still made her stomach turn. "You look troubled, my dear," said a gravelly voice behind her. Danielle turned to find Gerald Latham approaching with 2 glasses of wine. He was a distinguished man in his mid-50s, with silver hair and the kind of confidence that came from old money and older connections. "Oh, Mr. Latham, thank you for hosting this beautiful evening," Danielle said, accepting the glass politely. "Margaret and James are so lucky to have such a generous friend." Gerald's smile was warm, but something in his pale blue eyes made Danielle slightly uncomfortable. "Please call me Gerald. And the pleasure is all mine. Though I have to say, you seem distracted tonight. Everything all right?" Before Danielle could respond, her phone began buzzing in her small purse. She glanced at the caller ID and felt her heart skip. It was the call she had been waiting for. "I'm so sorry, I really need to take this," she said, already moving toward the edge of the terrace where the music and conversation wouldn't interfere. "Of course," Gerald said, his eyes following her as she walked away. "Take all the time you need." Danielle stepped onto a quieter section of the stone pathway that led toward the gardens. The October air was crisp, and she wished she had brought a jacket. She answered the phone on the 4th ring. "Hello, this is Danielle. Miss Harrow, this is David Chen from Chan & Associates. I apologize for calling so late, but I have some important news about your case." Danielle's grip tightened on the phone. For months, she had been working with the attorney to investigate what she believed was fraud in her grandfather's estate settlement. Her mother, Eloise, had convinced her to sign documents she claimed were routine paperwork. Only later did Danielle discover she had essentially signed away her rightful inheritance, a significant piece of land that had been in the Harrow family for generations. "What did you find?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've uncovered evidence that the documents were backdated, and there are signatures that don't match the notary's records. Miss Harrow, I believe you have a very strong case. We can move forward with filing a formal complaint first thing Monday morning." Danielle closed her eyes, feeling a mixture of relief and dread wash over her. She had always known her mother was capable of manipulation, but the depth of the betrayal still shocked her. "There's something else," the attorney continued. "I did some additional research into the land ownership history. That property your mother claimed? It appears she may have had help transferring it. Someone with connections to real estate law and local celebrities. What do you mean? I mean someone who knew exactly how to make this look legitimate. Miss Harrow, I think you should be very careful about who you trust with this information. Don't discuss this with anyone until we can meet on Monday. Danielle felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October air. I understand. Thank you, Mr. Chen. I'll see you Monday morning. She ended the call and stood in the darkness for a moment, processing what she had just learned. The sounds of the party seemed distant now, almost dreamlike. She turned to head back to the terrace, but stopped when she noticed a figure standing in the shadows near the garden entrance. Everything all right, Danielle? Gerald's voice carried across the pathway. Had he been listening? She couldn't tell how long he had been standing there, but something about his presence made her uneasy. Yes, everything's fine, she said, forcing a smile as she walked back toward the light. Just a work call. On a Saturday night? You teachers certainly are dedicated. His tone was friendly, but his eyes remained fixed on her face in a way that made her want to look away. Danielle rejoined the party, but the celebration felt different now. Every laugh seemed too loud, every smile too bright. She found herself watching Gerald throughout the evening, noticing how he seemed to appear wherever she was, always with that same pleasant expression and those calculating eyes. At 11:47 p.m., according to multiple witness statements, Danielle Harrow told Margaret Blackwood she was stepping outside to make another phone call. She was seen walking toward the parking area, her phone pressed to her ear. She was never seen alive again. The next morning, Margaret found Danielle's car in the circular driveway, keys on the driver's seat, engine cold. Her purse sat on the passenger seat, wallet intact, phone showing 3 missed calls from her sister Sarah. The emerald dress was nowhere to be found. By Sunday evening, when Danielle failed to show up for her weekly dinner with Sarah, the police were called. By Monday morning, when she didn't appear for work, the entire town of Sycamore Ridge was buzzing with theories and fear. The golden girl of Pine Valley Elementary had simply vanished into the autumn night, leaving behind only questions that would haunt the community for 15 long years. Lucas Bell had always believed that the forest held secrets. As he pushed through the thick undergrowth of Whispering Pines Trail, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool September morning, he couldn't shake the feeling that today would be different. The 26-year-old software developer had been hiking these woods for 3 years, ever since moving to Sycamore Ridge for a quieter life away from the chaos of city living. The trail had veered off its marked path about 2 miles back, but Lucas was an experienced hiker who enjoyed exploring unmarked territory. His GPS showed he was deep in the state forest, miles from any road or cabin. Ancient oak trees towered above him, their branches forming a canopy so thick that only scattered beams of sunlight reached the forest floor. It was the glint of metal that first caught his attention. Through a cluster of wild elderberry bushes, something was reflecting the morning light. Lucas pushed aside the branches and stopped in his tracks. Attached to the trunk of a massive oak tree, about 4 feet from the ground, was an old mailbox. Not the modern kind you'd see in suburban neighborhoods, but a vintage metal box, painted forest green though now dulled by years of weather and rust. "What the hell?" Lucas muttered, pulling out his phone to take a picture. There was no cell service this deep in the woods, but he wanted to document what was clearly the strangest thing he'd ever encountered on a hike. The mailbox was secured to the tree with heavy-duty bolts that had bit deep into the bark. Whoever had put it there meant for it to stay. A small wooden sign hung beneath it, the letters barely visible after years of rain and sun. "For those who remember." Lucas's heart pounded as he reached for the mailbox handle. It opened with a rusty creak that seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet forest. Inside, wrapped in what appeared to be wax cloth, was a manila envelope. The wax had protected it well. The envelope looked almost new despite clearly being there for years. With trembling hands, Lucas carefully unwrapped the package. The envelope was addressed in neat, feminine handwriting. "Mom, if you ever forgive me." In the bottom right corner, the initials, DH, were written in the same careful script, followed by a date that made Lucas's blood run cold, October 15th, 1998. That was 15 years ago, almost to the day. But it was what fell out of the envelope that made Lucas sink to his knees in the damp earth. A photograph fluttered to the ground, a faded color picture of a young woman with dark hair and kind eyes, standing next to an older woman with silver hair and a stern expression. Both women were dressed formally, and the younger one had her arm around the older woman's waist, though the older woman's posture seemed stiff and unwelcoming. Lucas picked up the photograph with shaking hands. On the back, in the same handwriting as the envelope, were the words, "Mom and me at graduation, before everything fell apart. I'm sorry for what I have to do. Danielle." The name hit Lucas like a physical blow. Every person in Sycamore Ridge knew the story of Danielle Harrow, the beloved teacher who had vanished without a trace from the Blackwood engagement party in 1998. Her disappearance had dominated local news for months, spawning conspiracy theories and wild speculation that persisted even now, 15 years later. Lucas's hands shook as he opened the envelope further. Inside was a single sheet of paper, the same neat handwriting covering both sides. As he read, the pieces of a puzzle that had mystified the entire community began to fall into place. "Dear Mom, if you're reading this, then something has happened to me, and I need you to know the truth. I know about the land. I know about the documents you made me sign. I know about Gerald and what you two planned together. I have proof now. Mr. Chen found the real papers in Grandfather's safe deposit box. You stole my inheritance, and you used Gerald to do it." The letter continued, revealing a web of deception that went far deeper than anyone had imagined. Danielle had discovered that her mother, Eloise Harrow, had conspired with Gerald Latham to forge documents that transferred valuable family land into Gerald's name. The land was worth millions, sitting on top of what geological surveys later revealed to be significant mineral deposits. "I'm scared, Mom. Gerald knows I found out. He's been watching me, calling me, trying to convince me to work things out privately. But I won't be silenced. I've made copies of everything and hidden them where no one will think to look. If something happens to me, the truth is in the old hunting lodge cellar, the one Grandfather showed us when I was little. You remember, don't you? Where we used to play hide and seek?" Lucas read the final paragraph with growing horror. "I'm meeting Gerald tomorrow night after the Blackwood party. He says he wants to make this right, that he'll give me back what's mine if I just give him a chance to explain. I don't trust him, but I have to try. For Grandfather's memory, and for the future I want to build. If you're reading this, it means I was right not to trust him. Please, Mom, if there's any love left in your heart for me, make this right. Don't let him win. Your daughter, Danielle." The forest around Lucas seemed to spin as the implications sank in. This wasn't just a missing person case. And according to the date on the letter, Danielle had hidden this evidence knowing she might die. Lucas carefully rewrapped the letter and photograph, his mind racing. He needed to get back to town, needed to call the police, needed to make sure this evidence reached the right people. But as he turned to leave, something else caught his eye. Carved into the bark of the oak tree, just below the mailbox, were 3 words that made his blood freeze. "She knows everything." The carving was fresh, maybe a few days old at most. Someone else had been here recently. Someone who knew about the mailbox, about the letter, about Danielle's secret. Lucas ran through the forest faster than he'd ever run in his life, branches tearing at his clothes and face. Behind him, he could swear he heard footsteps following, though he never dared to look back. Detective Maria Santos had seen her share of cold cases come back to life, but nothing quite like this. She sat across from Lucas Bell in the fluorescent-lit conference room of the Sycamore Ridge Police Department, the manila envelope, and its contents spread across the metal table like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle that had been missing for 15 years. "You're absolutely certain you didn't touch anything else at the scene?" Detective Santos asked, her pen poised over her notepad. Lucas nodded emphatically. "Just the mailbox and what was inside. Well, except for the carving. I took a picture of that too." He slid his phone across the table, showing the fresh scratches in the bark. Detective Santos studied the image, her brow furrowed. The carving was definitely recent. The wood was still light-colored where the bark had been scraped away. Someone had been to that mailbox very recently, and they knew more than they should. "Mr. Bell, I need you to understand something," Detective Santos said, leaning forward. "This case has been cold for 15 years. A lot of people in this town have moved on, built new lives, buried old secrets. What you found could turn everything upside down." She wasn't exaggerating. Within hours of Lucas's discovery, Detective Santos had pulled the original case files and contacted retired Detective Frank Morrison, who had led the initial investigation. The pieces that hadn't made sense 15 years ago were suddenly falling into place. The first stop was the county courthouse, where property records told a story that should have raised red flags years earlier. The Harrow family land, 230 acres of prime real estate on the outskirts of town, had been in the family for 3 generations. Danielle's grandfather, Benjamin Harrow, had been a respected banker who'd accumulated significant wealth and property during his lifetime. When Benjamin died in 1995, his will clearly stated that the land should be divided equally between his daughter Eloise and his granddaughter Danielle. But the documents filed with the county showed something different. According to the paperwork, Danielle had signed over her entire inheritance to her mother in 1996, just 1 year after her grandfather's death. "Look at this signature," Detective Santos said to her partner, Detective James Wright, as they examined the documents under a magnifying glass. "It doesn't match any of the other samples we have of Danielle's handwriting." Detective Wright pulled out the letter Lucas had found. The handwriting was clearly different, more confident, with distinctive loops in the letters G and Y that were completely absent from the property transfer documents. But the real shock came when they traced what happened to the land after Eloise acquired it. In 1997, just months before Danielle's disappearance, Eloise had sold the entire property to Gerald Latham for what county records showed as $50,000, a fraction of its actual value. $50,000 for 200 acres? Detective Wright shook his head in disbelief. "That land is worth at least $2 million today, probably more." Detective Santos picked up the phone and dialed the number for Sarah Harrowchin, Danielle's younger sister. Sarah had been 19 when Danielle disappeared, a college sophomore who'd spent the last 15 years believing her sister had simply walked away from her life. "Sarah, this is Detective Santos with Sycamore Ridge Police. I need to ask you some questions about your family's relationship with Gerald Latham." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for several seconds. When Sarah finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "He was supposed to be helping my mother with legal matters after Grandpa died. Mom said the estate was complicated, that she needed someone who understood property law." Sarah paused, and Detective Santos could hear her taking shaky breaths. "But Danielle never trusted him. She said there was something wrong about the whole situation." "What exactly did Danielle say?" "She thought Mom was hiding something. Danielle had always been Grandpa's favorite. He used to take her fishing on the land, taught her about the family history. She knew that property like the back of her hand." Sarah's voice grew stronger, anger replacing fear. "A few weeks before she disappeared, Danielle told me she was going to hire a lawyer. She said she had found something in Grandpa's papers that proved Mom had lied to her." Detective Santos exchanged glances with her partner. "Did she mention David Chen?" "Yes. That was the lawyer's name. Danielle was so excited, she said Mr. Chen had found evidence that would change everything. She was supposed to meet with him the Monday after the Blackwood party." The timeline was becoming clearer. Danielle had discovered the fraud, hired an attorney, and gathered evidence to prove her case. Someone, presumably Gerald Latham, had found out about her plans and decided to stop her permanently. But there was still one piece that didn't fit. Detective Santos pulled out the crime scene photos from 1998, spreading them across the table. Danielle's car had been found in the circular driveway of the Blackwood estate, keys on the seat, purse intact. If Gerald had finished her, why leave the car there? Why not dispose of it somewhere that wouldn't immediately point back to the party? He wanted it to look like she just walked away. Detective Wright said, reading her thoughts. Like she got overwhelmed and abandoned her car. People do that sometimes when they have mental breakdowns. But her phone showed missed calls from Sarah. If she was planning to disappear, wouldn't she have called her sister? Detective Santos stood up and walked to the window overlooking Main Street. 15 years ago, this case had consumed the town. Everyone had theories: jealous ex-boyfriends, random abduction, voluntary disappearance. But no one had looked closely enough at the money. Her phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. The caller ID showed David Chin, attorney at law. Detective Santos? I just heard about the discovery in the woods. I've been waiting 15 years for someone to find that evidence. Mr. Chin, we need to talk. Can you come to the station? I'm already in the parking lot. 20 minutes later, David Chin sat in the same chair Lucas had occupied earlier that morning. He was older now, his hair completely gray, but his eyes were sharp and focused. Danielle was convinced her family was being cheated, he said without preamble. She brought me documents that showed clear signs of forgery. The notary stamps were fake, the signatures didn't match, and the dates had been altered. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. I've kept copies of everything for 15 years, waiting for this day. Danielle Harrow was finished to keep her from exposing a conspiracy that goes deeper than anyone imagined. Detective Santos opened the folder and felt her breath catch. Inside were bank records, property transfers, and geological surveys that painted a picture of greed that would shake Sycamore Ridge to its very foundations. Gerald Latham's office occupied the entire top floor of the Sycamore Ridge Commerce Building, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a commanding view of the town below. Detective Santos studied the man behind the mahogany desk, noting how his hands remained perfectly still despite the bombshell accusations she had just laid out. These are very serious allegations, Detective, Gerald said, his voice calm and measured. But I'm afraid there's been some misunderstanding about my relationship with the Harrow family. Detective Santos placed the geological survey on his desk. This report shows that the land you purchased from Eloise Harrow sits on top of one of the largest limestone deposits in the state, worth approximately $15 million in mining rights alone. Gerald's pale blue eyes flickered to the document, but his expression remained neutral. I had no knowledge of any mineral deposits when I purchased the property. It was a legitimate business transaction. For $50,000? Detective Wright interjected from his position by the window. Mr. Latham, that land was worth at least $2 million 15 years ago, even without the mineral rights. Eloise needed money quickly to settle her late father's debts. I was helping an old friend. Gerald's tone suggested the conversation was over, but Detective Santos was just getting started. She pulled out her phone and played an audio recording. This is from our interview with Margaret Blackwood Torres this morning. She's the bride from the 1998 engagement party at your estate. Margaret's voice filled the room, clear and confident. I remember seeing Gerald talking to Danielle privately that night. It was unusual because Gerald usually stayed with the older guests, but he seemed very focused on her. They were by the garden entrance, and Danielle looked upset. Gerald's composure cracked slightly. Margaret's memory of that night is hardly reliable. She was celebrating her engagement, had been drinking. She wasn't the only witness, Detective Santos said, producing another statement. Your groundskeeper, Thomas Riley, retired last month after working for you for 23 years. Interesting timing, don't you think? The silence in the office was deafening. Gerald's hands finally moved, adjusting his tie in a gesture that seemed almost unconscious. Tom's getting old. His memory isn't what it used to be. His memory seems pretty clear about October 23, 1998. Detective Santos read from the statement. Mr. Latham told me to make sure the back garden stayed clear of guests that night. Said he had some private business to discuss. Around midnight, I saw him walking toward the old hiking trail with someone. Couldn't see who it was in the dark, but they seemed to be arguing. Gerald stood up abruptly, walking to the window with his back to the detectives. When he spoke, his voice was different, harder, with an edge that hadn't been there before. Thomas Riley is a bitter old man who's been spreading lies about me for years. If he had any real evidence of wrongdoing, why wait until now to come forward? Because he's dying. Detective Wright said quietly. Lung cancer. 6 months to live, according to his doctor. Funny how terminal illness makes people want to clear their conscience. Gerald turned around, and for the first time, Detective Santos saw real fear in his eyes. What exactly are you accusing me of? We're not accusing you of anything yet, Detective Santos said, standing up and walking toward him. We're investigating the disappearance of Danielle Harrow, and your name keeps coming up in connection with suspicious circumstances. She placed crime scene photos on his desk, images of Danielle's abandoned car, her purse, the keys left on the driver's seat. Tell me again about the last time you saw Danielle that night. Gerald's jaw tightened. I already told the police 15 years ago. She said goodbye to Margaret and left the party. That was the last anyone saw of her. That's not quite true, is it? Detective Santos pulled out another document. We found Danielle's phone records from that night. She received a call at 11:52 p.m., 5 minutes after she supposedly left the party. The call lasted 3 minutes and came from a burner phone purchased 2 days earlier with cash. Gerald's face had gone pale. I don't know anything about that. The call was made from a cell tower less than a mile from your estate. Someone called Danielle and convinced her to stay longer or to meet them somewhere. Detective Santos leaned forward. Who else knew about her investigation into the property fraud? I don't know what you're talking about. Detective Wright stepped forward with a new piece of evidence, a bank statement. This shows a cash withdrawal of $25,000 from your personal account on October 20th, 1998. 3 days before Danielle disappeared. That was for a business expense. What kind of business expense requires $25,000 in cash? Detective Santos asked. Gerald's lawyer would later claim that his client was being harassed, that the police were conducting a fishing expedition based on circumstantial evidence. But in that moment, sitting in his luxurious office with 15 years of secrets crashing down around him, Gerald Latham looked like exactly what he was, a man who had thought he'd gotten away with that crime. I want to call my attorney, he said finally. Detective Santos nodded, but before she could respond, her phone buzzed with an urgent text message. She glanced at it and felt her pulse quicken. Mr. Latham, I'm afraid we're going to have to continue this conversation at the police station. We have a search warrant for your property, and we've just found something very interesting in the woods behind your estate. As they led Gerald away in handcuffs, Detective Santos couldn't help but think about Danielle's letter, the young woman who had been brave enough to investigate corruption and smart enough to leave behind evidence that would eventually bring her finisher to justice. The woods behind the Latham estate were about to give up their secrets, and after 15 years of silence, Danielle Harrow was finally going to have her voice heard. The excavation team arrived at dawn, their equipment rumbling through the forest like mechanical beasts awakening from sleep. Detective Santos stood at the edge of the cordoned-off area, watching as ground-penetrating radars swept back and forth over the earth near the ancient oak tree where Lucas had found the mailbox. We've got something, called Dr. Rebecca Foster, the forensic anthropologist leading the search. She knelt beside a section of disturbed soil about 30 yards from the mailbox, her brush carefully removing layers of dirt and decomposed leaves. What they uncovered first wasn't a body, but something far more intriguing, the rotted wooden remains of what appeared to be a trapdoor, hidden beneath years of forest growth. The wood was old, much older than 15 years, suggesting this hiding place had existed long before Danielle's disappearance. It's a root cellar, explained Thomas Riley, the elderly groundskeeper who had agreed to help with the search despite his failing health. He leaned heavily on his walking stick, his voice hoarse from the cancer treatments. Mr. Gerald's grandfather built it back in the 1940s. Used to be part of an old hunting lodge that burned down in the 50s. Detective Santos felt her pulse quicken. Danielle's letter had mentioned hiding evidence. In the old hunting lodge cellar. Even facing death, the young teacher had been trying to leave breadcrumbs for someone to follow. The excavation team worked methodically, photographing every layer as they dug deeper. The root cellar was larger than expected, a rectangular space roughly 8 feet by 6 feet, with stone walls that had withstood decades of weather and neglect. "Detective, you need to see this," Dr. Foster called from inside the cellar. Detective Santos climbed down the wooden ladder they had positioned over the opening. The smell of damp earth and decay filled her nostrils, but there was something else, the faint scent of old leather and fabric. In the far corner of the cellar, wrapped in what remained of a plastic tarp, was a collection of items that made Detective Santos's heart race. A single black high heel, the mate to the shoe they had never found at the crime scene. A torn piece of emerald fabric that matched perfectly with the dress Danielle had worn to the party. And most shocking of all, a small digital camera wrapped in a silk scarf that had somehow survived the years underground. "The camera still has its memory card," Dr. Foster said, holding up the device with gloved hands. "If we're lucky, there might be something on it." But it was what they found beneath the camera that truly broke the case wide open. Another envelope, this one sealed in multiple layers of plastic and marked with Danielle's handwriting. "For the police, the whole truth." Detective Santos carefully opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a second letter, much longer than the first, along with several photographs and what appeared to be photocopied documents. "If you're reading this, then Gerald Latham has finished me, and I need you to know everything," the letter began. "I'm writing this on October 22nd, the day before the Blackwood party. Gerald called me tonight and asked me to meet him after the party. He says he wants to make things right about the land, but I know it's a trap." Detective Santos continued reading, her amazement growing with each paragraph. Danielle had been far more prepared than anyone had realized. "I've been investigating the property fraud for months. What I discovered is bigger than just my family's land. Gerald has been using forged documents to steal property from elderly residents all over the county. My mother wasn't his only victim, she was just the easiest target because of her gambling debts." The letter detailed a systematic scheme of elder fraud that had netted Gerald millions of dollars over the years. Eloise Harrow had accumulated significant gambling debts at the local casino, and Gerald had offered to help her in exchange for cooperation in the land grab. "I have recordings," Danielle wrote. "Gerald doesn't know, but I've been wearing a wire to our meetings for the past month. He's admitted everything, the forged signatures, the backdated documents, even bragged about how easy it was to manipulate my mother." Detective Santos looked up at Dr. Foster. "Did we find any recording equipment?" Dr. Foster pointed to a small device they had photographed in situ. "That appears to be a micro-cassette recorder. Very advanced for 1998. The letter's final paragraphs revealed the full scope of Danielle's courage and foresight. "I've made copies of everything and hidden them in 3 different locations. If something happens to me, the evidence will surface eventually. Gerald thinks he's so smart, but he underestimated a small-town teacher. I know I should go to the police now, but I need more evidence. Gerald is connected to people in city, including someone in the district attorney's office. I can't risk the case being buried. Tomorrow night, I'm going to get him to confess on tape. I'll be wearing the wire, and I've set up a backup recording system in his car. If I don't survive this, please make sure my sister Sarah knows I was trying to protect our family's legacy. And please make Gerald pay for what he's done to all those families." Detective Santos climbed out of the root cellar, her mind reeling. Danielle hadn't just stumbled onto a property dispute. She had uncovered a massive fraud operation and had been systematically gathering evidence to expose it. "We need to search Gerald's house immediately," she told Detective Wright. "And we need to check every property transaction he's been involved in for the past 20 years. As the sun set over the excavation site, crime scene technicians carefully bagged and cataloged each piece of evidence. The microcassette recorder would be sent to the FBI's Audio Enhancement Lab, where experts would attempt to recover any recordings that might still be intact after 15 years underground. But even without the recordings, they had enough evidence to charge Gerald Latham with fraud, conspiracy, and most importantly, the finishing of Danielle Harrow. The young teacher's final gambit had worked. From beyond the grave, she was finally going to get justice, not just for herself, but for all the families Gerald had destroyed in his quest for wealth and power. The woods of Sycamore Ridge had kept their secrets for 15 years, But Danielle Harrow had made sure the truth would eventually surface. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity on the morning of Gerald Latham's sentencing. Sarah Harrowchin sat in the front row, clutching the hand of her 16-year-old daughter Emma, the niece Danielle had never gotten to meet, born just 3 months after her disappearance. Judge Patricia Hancock reviewed the stack of evidence one final time before addressing the court. The FBI's audio enhancement lab had worked miracles with the micro-cassette recorder found in the root cellar. Despite 15 years underground, they had recovered nearly 40 minutes of conversations between Danielle and Gerald, including his full confession to the property fraud scheme. "Mr. Latham," Judge Hancock said, her voice carrying the weight of 15 years of injustice. "You have been found guilty of conspiracy to commit fraud, elder abuse, obstruction of justice, and voluntary manslaughter in the death of Danielle Harrow." Gerald sat motionless at the defendant's table, a shadow of the confident businessman who had once dominated Sycamore Ridge's social scene. His empire had crumbled spectacularly over the past 6 months. The investigation had revealed that he had defrauded at least 17 elderly residents out of their property, accumulating nearly $25 million in ill-gotten gains. "While Miss Harrow's body has never been recovered," the judge continued, "the evidence clearly shows that you lured her to a remote location with the intent to silence her investigation. Your actions resulted in her death and caused immeasurable pain to her family and community." Detective Santos watched from the gallery as Gerald was sentenced to 25 years to life. It wasn't enough, it could never be enough, but it was justice. The real victory, however, had come 3 months earlier when the court overturned all of Gerald's fraudulent property acquisitions. The Harrow family land, along with the millions in mineral rights, was returned to its rightful owner, Emma Harrowchin, Danielle's niece. "I want to do something meaningful with this," Emma had told Detective Santos after the property transfer was finalized. "Aunt Danielle died protecting our family's legacy. I want to honor that." The answer came from an unexpected source. Lucas Bell, the hiker who had discovered Danielle's hidden message, approached the family with a proposal. As a software developer who had grown to love the wilderness around Sycamore Ridge, he suggested turning the land into a memorial nature preserve. "Your aunt loved these woods," Lucas had told Emma and Sarah. "She chose them as the place to hide her truth. Maybe they can be a place where her memory lives on." The Danielle Harrow Memorial Nature Preserve opened to the public exactly 1 year after the discovery of the letters. The 200-acre preserve featured hiking trails, educational programs about local wildlife, and a small visitor center that told the story of the brave teacher who had refused to let injustice prevail. The original oak tree where Lucas had found the mailbox became the centerpiece of the memorial. A bronze plaque was mounted at its base with Danielle's own words from her final letter. "The truth will surface eventually." But the most powerful memorial was less visible to casual visitors. Working with local historians and Emma's input, they had restored the old hunting lodge foundation where Danielle had hidden her evidence. A small stone marker read, "In memory of those who fight for truth, even when the cost is everything." Thomas Riley, the elderly groundskeeper whose testimony had been crucial to Gerald's conviction, didn't live to see the preserve's opening. He passed away peacefully 6 months after the trial, finally able to rest knowing that his silence had ended with justice. Detective Santos attended the preserve's dedication ceremony on a crisp October morning that reminded everyone of that fateful night in 1998. She watched as hundreds of community members walked the trails that Danielle had once used to hide her desperate message to the future. "She saved so many families," Sarah said, standing beside the memorial oak with tears in her eyes. "All those elderly people Gerald would have continued to target if she hadn't stopped him." The preserve's impact extended far beyond Sycamore Ridge. Danielle's story inspired new legislation protecting elderly residents from property fraud, and her methods of evidence collection became part of training programs for investigators across the state. Emma, now a freshman at State University studying environmental law, served as the preserve's first student director. She had inherited more than just land from her aunt. She had inherited Danielle's sense of justice and determination to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. "People ask me if I'm angry that I never got to meet her," Emma said during the dedication speech. But I feel like I know her through everything she left behind. She didn't just leave me land, she left me a legacy of standing up for what's right, no matter the cost. As the sun set over the Danielle Harrow Memorial Nature Preserve, Detective Santos walked the trail that led to the memorial oak. The forest was peaceful now, its secrets finally revealed, its silence broken by the laughter of children exploring the educational exhibits and the quiet conversations of visitors learning about the woman who had refused to let evil triumph. The mailbox was gone, but its message lived on. Sometimes the truth takes 15 years to surface, but when it does, it can change everything. Danielle Harrow had vanished from a party in 1998, but her voice, strong, determined, and uncompromising, would echo through these woods forever.